Hey guys, and welcome back to another progress log for Colonizing Conan, the project where we entirely colonise the exiled lands. Today we are back in Fallstead with some massive changes. Also, we are currently looking for builders and decorators for this project, and you can apply through my Discord server, link in the description. So, without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, there is an issue that's arisen within this city. To put it simply, it's unsustainable. I have a fairly good PC, but even on low settings I'm averaging around 20 FPS in the residential and commercial areas, and near the Grand Wall in the south I'm in regularly about single digits in terms of frames. As this city grows, it will reach a point where it's impossible to even really build there, let alone record progress logs. So therefore, it's gone. Not the whole city, of course, mainly just the problem areas, like the Grand Wall, commercial and residential sectors. Now, admittedly, the performance wasn't the only concern. I really grew to dislike these designs that, admittedly, I had done myself, and there were loads of places where I could save a lot of resources to improve performance. As time passed, I also thought the very formulaic and predictable layout of many of the buildings didn't have that varied feeling I wanted to capture. So, rather than attempting to carry on, the smarter and sustainable choice was to completely raise this area and begin again with a more focused and balanced approach. So with that being said, let's take a look at the new zoning plan. Comparing the previous and current plan side by side, I've shaved quite a bit of space off the city to help with a more consistent and appropriate zoning. I've brought the defensive wall in massively, instead spreading it across the flanks and removing the walls that sit between the sectors to improve flow within the city. Also, whilst talking about performance saving steps, I've also added an AOC map edit blocker mod to the server to remove the beautiful, though very taxing southern jungle and the other map changes that may introduce issues in the future. So, with this plan and a more focused vision for how the city should look and feel, I think Fallstead is going to end up even better than it would have originally. Firstly, let's look across the new walls. Fallstead is the home of the Stormhold, who I've characterised as a sort of high-class fantasy medieval in terms of architecture, though there is an air of smugness amongst them. Therefore, rather than having these massive defensive walls to fight off threats, I felt like a slightly more modest, though still fairly defensive wall plays a bit more into that vibe that they think nobody would dare attack them, probably due to their military might. I loved the previous Grand Wall, it was perfect for that fantasy vibe, but the performance around that wall was unfortunately completely unsustainable. To quantify that a bit better, I was getting roughly between 6 and 10 frames per second around the wall on low settings, even after installing the AOC map edit blocker. After removing the wall, the structures and the decorations around it, I was then sat at about 170 FPS. I was disappointed to have to remove it, but it's going to be the healthier choice for this project and the server in the long run. Let's take a look at the new church just beyond the walls. This church is much smaller and more modest than the previous design, and whilst I did like that design a lot, it felt a little too modern in its design. It also felt a bit too intricate in the revolver staircases, and bordered on confusing at times, so this design instead focuses on a more traditional medieval style that should aim to make the church feel like a restoration of a building much older than most of the city. This redesign takes some of the best parts of the previous cathedral and the previous church build that I built in this city, and aims to meld them together in a more coherent and attractive design. I've included a long runway from the gate to the Mitra shrine at the end, and I've also kept the dual pulpit design on the first floor that overlooks a lot of the worshippers on the ground. Due to its proximity to the Royal District and the High Residential District, this church and this section of the city is more aimed at high society, and thus a lot of the poorer citizens won't really be seen in the church all too often. The rear of the church on the ground floor includes a communal kitchen designed to serve the needy if they require it, and also a small study that provides access to the Crypt. This is a teleport access only area far out of bounds at the map. It's designed to improve performance within whilst reducing the rendering load on the city. The Crypt is an ancient burial ground maintained by the priests and keepers of the church, and plays host to the tombs of important figures within Fallstead's history. This includes previous members of the royal family, high-ranking military officials and previous high priests that have since passed on. The crypt isn't terribly important in the city function, but it's a nice area to have that adds a bit more history and weight to the church, and Fallstead at large. It was pretty interesting to build as well, seeing as I built it way out of bounds, and I pretty much built it in the style I wouldn't build anything else, including the fact that it's basically a really weird shape on the exterior, and the lighting is adjusted with a massive skybox. Heading back to the church, the first floor includes access to the aforementioned pulpits, and a second, larger study area that serves as a pseudo-library. The affinity for Mitra within Fallstead sometimes borders upon fanatical amongst the upper classes, and thus the priests spend a majority of their time not spent sleeping or delivering sermons here, in this library, reading into their faith and trying to divine communication from their honourable God. Finally, the second floor is a very narrow access corridor that leads up to the third floor, which then itself is a narrow access corridor which leads up to the bell tower. These bells are used to announce the sunrise, midday and sunset across the city, and are also rang in times of either great celebration or great crisis. I've also rebuilt the courthouse and town hall, adjusting the previous designs and creating new structures that are honestly much improved and fit way better than the previous designs. Nocturnal Moon was actually the person that reminded me to build these structures again, as I had pretty much forgotten and honestly probably wouldn't have remembered had she not mentioned them. The new courthouse is of a similar internal layout to the previous, though with a much more simplified and streamlined design to make a good use of its internal and external space. The new courthouse includes a nice exterior plaza with a fountain and benches, alongside a slightly more extravagant entranceway that really plays up the prestige of the build. The interior is fairly modest, with the lobby including two sections, one for paying taxes and fines and the other for registration and filing court paperwork. The lobby also includes staircase access on either side to the viewing gallery above the courtroom, where you'll find another elven researcher. Just as Ormanas near the palace and Caelan in the church, this elven presence is something I want to be prevalent throughout the more high society elements of the city. The courtroom itself is nice and simple, a more condensed and simplified version of the original that has some nice spacing and really works with the perceived extravagance and prestige of Stormhold. The rear of the courthouse also provides a small private study area for the judge. I was debating making this courthouse operate with a jury, however it would require an extensive redesign to make it fit, and thus I think a single judge presiding over the court case fits this design much better. The study is pretty cosy too, providing a nice bit of privacy between hearings. The town hall was an interesting redesign. The previous iteration was extremely similar to the courthouse, probably too similar, and seeing as I've redesigned that build, I thought I'd do the same with the town hall. Basically, my approach was a very scaled down and simplified version of the town hall from season 1 of Settlers, taking some of the core design concepts and making it into a smaller and more streamlined design. The efforts of democracy aren't terribly valuable within Fallstead, as, being a monarchy, everything must run through the royal in charge before being passed into law. Therefore, the town hall isn't used terribly much, apart from by the members of higher society aiming to imitate their influence. The most the town hall gets done is simple neighbourhood resolutions or discussions of upcoming events. I think this diminished nature is reflected in the design, though I may still adjust this design slightly in the future and make it a little larger. Heading over to the southern side of the city, this is a sort of lower class industrial area that will transition into commercial and mid-residential. Our first stop is the Dignitaries dock, a pier of prestige for established merchants and traders within the city. Goods shipped here are usually expedited through the customs process and then sent throughout the city, with most luxury goods being processed here and sent to the Royal District. This area was pretty much entirely made by Alfric, one of my patrons and a new collaborator on the project. The dock itself is fairly small and mainly receives shipments from reputable eastern merchants such as the Elven colonies, and also some of the other roving traders that do not live on the continent. Currently there is an Elven Covenant merchant ship docked in the process of offloading their goods. Behind the dock is the expansive Workyard. This includes a decently sized customs building and a larger fenced off segment that includes storage, offices, workshops and production areas. The Workyard stores goods and product from all forms of input, not just the Dignitaries dock, but recognised merchants do receive preferential access to storage and customs. This area isn't fully complete. Myself and Alfric have been decorating this area between some other spots in the city, and I've personally added a loading bay where goods are packaged and sent out on horse-drawn carts to the various recipients throughout Fallstead. Among some smaller decorations, I've also added a mine entrance, designed to allow Fallstead to produce some of its own stones and ores. I do intend to flesh out this area more in the future and create an actual traversable mine, probably accessible through teleport similar to the Crypt, but you will probably see that in the next progress log. This area works wonderfully in the transition between the slums and what will become the commercial and mid-residential area, and will play a massive part in production and industry throughout the city. Finally, my favourite area, the slums. This area was the driving force behind wiping the previous residential area and starting anew. This location is not yet complete, there is still quite a bit of decoration and some architectural additions to do, but it's in a state that I think is pretty indicative of its final design. The slums are a lower class area located on the waterfront, inspired by a mix of Dishonour and Greedfall, two games with really awesome slum areas. Alfric and myself built this together, with him handling the northern segment as I built up the south, and then eventually meeting up in the middle. A key part of this vision are the waterways that run through the upper slums, which help to add a bit more of that dirty, deprived feeling. I've built on this with mixed lighting, rough wood, debris, ivy and clothing lines throughout the slums. Civilians within the slums are the polar opposite of most within the central city. They believe their poverty is caused by the greed of those at the top of high society, and whilst many are indifferent at best, some do have active plans of rebellion. They are not friendly to outsiders in the slightest, so being liberal with the truth is often the best course to take. Atop the catwalks we can find Jessa Fullern, one of the poverty-stricken residents of the slums. Speaking to her, she's clearly distracted by something in the abandoned lodge at the centre of this area. If we tell her we're just exploring, she won't be very forthcoming, but with a little white lie she'll eventually let out that she heard some screams coming from the lodge the previous night, and she's now watching for any signs of activity. She seems doubtful though, as the lodge has been firmly boarded up for a long time. However, if you're brave enough to drop into the filthy water that runs through the slums and underneath the lodge, we can find a secret hatch. Within the lodge lays quite the scene. The blood and clearly used torture tools mean the screams Jessa heard were likely coming from within this abandoned building. This lodge is one of the many secret hideouts of the Cold Embrace, a shadow organisation with tendrils that stretch across the world. With the body of the victim already bound and ready for disposal, we can't know for sure who it was, but the Stormhold guard's sword on the table may give us a hint. Heading upstairs, it appears that there are likely a few Cold Embrace members living here. They're keeping some civilian clothing near the stairs, and it seems they're also using ravens for communication, something easily overlooked in Fallstead. With their proficiency in hiding in plain sight, any person on the streets could be a member. Perhaps the most important question is exactly what the Cold Embrace are doing here in Fallstead, and what they're looking for. And there we have it, Fallstead Progress Log number 5. There were some structures and areas that I didn't delve into this time as they're not fully complete yet, so I will be saving them for the next update. I'm hoping to have another one ready before the next major title update, as it will likely break all the server mods again and then we'll have to wait a while for them to be updated. Hopefully I can get that progress log done before then. There is still plenty of work to do, but I do think restructuring has helped to create a much better foundation for this city. If you enjoy my content, all the links to my Twitch, Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Host Havoc affiliate page, NordVPN discount and NordPass discount are available in the description below. However, of course, you can simply just leave a like, a comment or subscribe. Any of those are very greatly appreciated. Patrons get a bunch of nice benefits, including sneak peeks of videos, your name in every video, custom made wallpapers in 1080p and 4K resolutions, full-size build blueprints, Discord roles and more. As always, a massive thanks to our patrons Sadialot, Randar, Connor, Ivy, Torn, Ill-Fated, Coffeeman04, Jacques, Marion Ladd, Ryan, Ben, Alfric, Eagle Rose, Psychotic Diva, Melanie, and X Screechers X. As always, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.